Assange and Wikileaks a base in Iceland, and I think she came under fire for that as well, and that all went a bit wrong. And you can read about that on cryptome.org, and I think some of that is in the data. It's mentioned a little bit in Esterlin's book, isn't it?
So, yeah. There's several quotes from John Young in this book, Deconstructing WikiLeaks. So John Young was actually invited at the start of WikiLeaks to be on the board. But very soon after, he claimed that WikiLeaks is a fraud and they're working for the enemy. And he's made, as you say, he's made comments about the funding. I'll read out perhaps a few more quotes. So this is what Young has said. Announcing a $5 million fundraising goal by July will kill this effort. It makes WikiLeaks appear to be a Wall Street scam. This amount could not be needed so soon except for suspect purposes. I'd say the same about the alleged 1.1 million documents ready for leaking. Right? So he's saying the fact that they've got so many documents straight away makes it look like a scam. Way too many to be believable without evidence. I don't believe the number. So far, one document of highly suspect provenance. And then he says here, well, it only came up in the topic of raising $5 million the first year. That was the first red flag that I heard about. I thought that they were actually a public interest group up until then. But as soon as I heard that, I knew that they were a criminal organization. Right? So pretty strong claims there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And let me just mention a few other people who, because WikiLeaks, when it was set up, it did publish the board members, the people involved, the group involved. But apparently it doesn't now. The board members are kept secret, as are the finances kept secret.
Yeah, that was one of the things that in the emails. They wanted to get public accounts. You know, once they'd set this going, this was in 2010, and they couldn't get any published accounts. They couldn't get Assange. Apparently they were accusing Assange of being a one-man band, you know, and he wouldn't publish any accounts. He wouldn't tell him where the money had come from, where it was going to, etc. And that I think was why they ended up not actually getting a footing in Iceland, because the people there weren't happy that the organisation was transparent enough for them.
Right. I mentioned earlier, I'm just going to list a few of the characters involved in the board. I mentioned earlier that WikiLeaks was advised by the NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, and the FH, which is the Freedom House, both which have got links to what you might call the New World Order, the Council on Foreign Relations and the CIA.
Yeah.
Now, one person who was on the advisory board of WikiLeaks was Philip Adams. Now, he held Australian governmental media administration posts, and he worked for News Corp, owned by Rupert Murdoch. Let me have a look. Who else? We've got Chinese dissidents and Tiananmen dissidents, but who had links to CIA, were on the board of WikiLeaks. One of them, Liu, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, Xiaob, Chinese literary critic, writer, professor, and human rights activist who called for political reforms and the end of communism, single-party rule in China. So this is someone who wants to reform China, and this is things that I've heard in various emails that, let's say, states that are considered rogue states are targets of WikiLeaks, or rogue regimes. So if you're going to release dirt on certain regimes, we've heard the word, what's the next stage that follows that? Regime change. So have they been set up to assist the CIA's global plan to regime change any government which they don't like by releasing dirt on those rogue regimes, including China? Another name that I'll just mention is Cass Sunstein, who was an advisor to the Obama administration. He wasn't on the board of WikiLeaks, but he mentioned WikiLeaks in a very early article that he wrote in February 2007, before there'd been any significant releases again. So whether he just plucked that out of the mainstream media, I don't know. Now, this guy has written about conspiracy theories and how their behaviours need to be managed by government, and how conspiracy theorists need to have their parties infiltrated and all the rest of it. We need to infiltrate conspiracy groups, this guy has said. So he's mentioned WikiLeaks. We've got another guy called Ben Laurie, who is the former cybersecurity boss of Google, director of the Open Rights Group, Assange asked Laurie for help designing a system to protect leakers' anonymity. Are you really going to go to Google to set up your system? When we know that Google is absolute corporate player, and then the name of George Soros keeps popping up as well, a character who is connected to all of the different New World Order players. Now, another character involved you might want to look up is Daniel Domscheit-Berg, or Daniel Schmidt as he was called. He joined WikiLeaks a year after it was set up, but then left in 2010, and he's written a book about it, right, which I've downloaded, and I started reading it. Computer nerds don't write the best books, right? I don't really want to know what Assange has got in his duffel bag, you know what I mean? So I got a bit bored of that. But he's an odd character to watch videos on and try and figure out, well, if WikiLeaks is a complete intel setup, then this guy who was invited to join Assange, they were kind of a double act for a little while. You can find a lecture that they've given, a joint lecture that they've given. That must mean that he'd have to be in the fold as well, I would have thought. So did he write his own book? You can find videos of him online. So you look at the characters involved, it doesn't fill you with confidence. It doesn't make you think this organization is what it claims.
No, no.
All right. So let's now, let's come on to his sort of living situation, right? Because there's some comedy mileage in this. So let's first go to 2009. This is an article which states that Julian Assange was wined and dined at the US Embassy. To the United States, Julian Assange may be public enemy number one. Some American politicians have even called for his execution. Right, so this article's been written at the end of December 2010, but less than a year ago, in December 2009, the founder of WikiLeaks was officially entertained at the US Embassy cocktail party by one of the very diplomats whose secrets he would soon spill to the world. At the reception held at the US Ambassador's residence in Reykjavik, Iceland, Mr. Assange chatted with Sam Watson, the embassy's deputy chief of mission. Assange was already sitting on dozens of Mr. Watson's classified cables at the time of the December party, including embarrassing details about America's and Britain's role following the collapse of Iceland's banks, which were later published to widespread outrage in the local media. So there's also information, I think, that he's leaked on Sarah Palin. Sarah Palin has called for Assange to be hunted down. Right, so he's been invited to US embassies, right? And okay, so this is December 2009. So at some point, I don't know the exact date, people can look it up, there was rape allegations from someone in Sweden. Well, not from them, I believe, I think it was from the police, but there's a supposed rape case from Sweden. So he was then in legal difficulties, and there's also some alleged ongoing possible prosecution or stroke investigation from some court in the US, right? So he's kind of in exile, and was given a home in the UK by independent video news journalist Vaughan Smith, and his family welcomed Mr. Assange, who created the whistleblowing website, into their home at Ellingham Hall near Bungay between December 2010 and December 2011. So he's living in this posh mansion in East Anglia for a year. Now, it just so happens that Vaughan Smith, whose house he was living in, is the owner of the Frontline Club. Now, the Frontline Club is this sort of elitist media organisation where people in the media get together and talk about certain things. And who helped set that up? George Soros, right? So while he's living in this house, we'll come on to his Ecuadorian embassy residence in a minute after we've done this next bit. So he's been sort of given a free home by this really wealthy media guy who probably knows George Soros in East Anglia for a year.
So it's clear he's well in with the elite, because he's getting looked after by them.
Now, so while he's living in East Anglia, which is this place not far from Norwich, he actually takes part in an episode of The Simpsons. He's featured on The Simpsons, and it is his real voice. So I'm just going to show the clip of The Simpsons episode that featured Assange's real voice. Let's just take a look at this.
I miss our home, and I want to go back.
It's not perfect here, but it is close to nature. And if you have an axe to grind, Wikileaks is right over there. How you doing, Mr. Assange?
That's my personal information, and you have no right to know about it. Hey, but we're neighbors. Would you like to come over for a movie sometime?
Is it Iraqi journalists being murdered?
Don't be ridiculous. It's an Afghan wedding being bombed.
Well, I've got a really big secret for you. I'm not wearing any underwear.
You know, you should really get out less.
Right, okay. Do you want to give a quick comment on the actual content of that first, Andrew, before we go on to
Well,
this?
we pointed out that he's not a very good actor, is he? So that's fairly obvious. But humour aside, I mean, there are some quite sinister overtones to it as well. And we could probably do a whole programme on the actual Simpsons itself as another type of psychological operation. That's a whole other story. But when you discussed that with me a while ago, but I think we're going to, you've obviously got some more information which I think proves that the people behind The Simpsons must be very well connected to people in the elite and the intelligence community.
One thing is definite, Assange agreed to take part in that Simpsons programme, and it was his voice in that programme. So he approved of that joke, making a joke about bombing an Afghani wedding.
Yeah.
Right. So I actually happen to know where Assange recorded the voice, because you say, well, he's living in the UK, he doesn't go to America anymore. How's he got a walk on part in The Simpsons? This is how. So this came from a Rich Planet viewer, and I'll read it all out. In the summer of 2007, 2 weeks before the financial crash was announced, I purchased the best known recording studio in Norwich, Purple Studios, in conjunction with a radio station that I was running. We recorded many artists, mostly local, but some more famous, such as the Manic Street Preachers. Yeah, Richie Edwards, he's still alive, by the way. In August of 2011, I received a phone call from an American woman who inquired about studio availability for the following week. She said that she was calling from Los Angeles and wanted to know if we could record an artist, but to record over ADSL to their studio in LA. We only had a basic broadband, and I explained that we had done similar things before over Skype, but recorded the files locally, and then we could send the file recording via digital means. She did not expand upon what the project was, but asked us to use discretion as this had to be kept secret. The following week came and went with no further contact. I thought it was a wind-up. But a few days later, she phoned again and apologised for not contacting us the previous week. Is the studio available for tomorrow night? She asked. I said yes. She gave me her details, and her name was Bonnie Patila. She said that the producer of a TV show would call me at 6 p.m. the following day to go through what was required. She also requested that only myself and my sound engineer could be on site, and that we were to keep quiet about the job as it was sensitive. This was very intriguing. What could it be? My sound engineer and I waited the following day, not knowing what was going on or who was going to walk through the door. At 6 p.m. the phone rang, and an American man introduced himself as Al Jean, the producer of The Simpsons. He explained that we were to record a voiceover for one of the characters for the show, the 500th episode as it turned out, and that he, Al Jean, would direct him over Skype. We still did not know who the voiceover was, but it had become very exciting. At 7 p.m, a black car pulled up outside and a man came to the door. We confirmed that it was the correct location and the man had a quick look around, probably checking that it was just myself and the sound engineer. He then returned to the car and came back in with a woman and Julian Assange. We locked the doors behind everyone and prepared for the session. The woman turned out to be Assange's press agent, and she had the script that Julian Assange was going to read from. Algene spoke to the woman and Julian Assange over the phone, and I explained that Mr. Assange would be in the recording booth whilst we would all be in the control room. I spent the next hour on the phone to Algene, relaying his directions to the sound booth whilst we listened to Assange reading his script. Do that line again with a bit more gusto, and more emphasis on the "that's my personal information and they have no right to know about it," etc. So he was even directed for that really poor piece of acting. Can you believe it? Right. It was a very, very strange experience all round. Julian Assange was a very strange individual. He was even taller than me, and he had a very strange aura about him, which actually made me feel a bit uneasy. He did not make any casual conversation. I wanted to ask him about Wikileaks, as it was big news at the time due to the allegations of sexual harassment by Sweden, but I did not feel at all comfortable talking to him. I knew from the news that Assange was being held in house arrest in Suffolk, and the fact that he was in my building meant that I was in fact harbouring a wanted criminal. At the time, I believed that he was one of the FBI's most wanted men, hence the secrecy. But obviously we know he's living in some mansion house, driving around in a car. He's clearly not a wanted man. If you do any search for Julian Assange, The Simpsons, it will say that the voiceover was recorded during house arrest at an undisclosed location near London. It was in fact in Norwich. Articles such as this one on Wikipedia and this one here also state that the producers of The Simpsons did not know the location and were only given a phone number to call, which is obviously untrue because they were the ones who reached out to us and booked the studio. So they're saying officially that they spoke to Assange on just some telephone number and they didn't know where he was, someone's driven him to the studio with his PR agent, and they've actually booked the studio.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a total setup, you know. I mean, top to bottom.
Yeah. So he's a handled entity.
Yes. Yeah. He's protected. He's managed. He has a press, officer or whatever how you press, secretary or however you describe.
So the fact that they have to make up a lie that we don't know where he was when we recorded that for The Simpsons. It was somewhere, it was some secret place, thus perpetuating the myth that he's a wanted man and he's kind of in hiding in house arrest or whatever.
And just by listening to the quality of the audio, you can tell it wasn't recorded on a phone. They don't have him speaking down a phone in the Simpsons episode. They have him at a campsite, don't they, or something, is it, in the scene.
Yeah, it just says, it will say that the voiceover was recorded during house arrest at an undisclosed location near London. So it doesn't say what technology was used, but it's somewhere where they didn't know where it was, which is clearly a lie. The whole affair was recorded within 2 hours. They all left. I had been asked by Algene, Bonnie Patila, and the woman who accompanied Assange not to talk about what had happened as they needed to keep the whole thing under wraps. When they had left, my sound engineer and I agreed that it probably wasn't a good idea to talk to anyone about it, as it could have implications for us with the US intelligence agencies. Plus I was running my Big Brother website and a bit of paranoia kicked in. So this chap's actually into alternative subjects, and he's posted some of my videos on his website. The fact of the matter that he was under house arrest and was trying to be extradited to the US by the American government. I'm not sure if that's correct, mind, but the extradition request. We'll come on to that. Assange broke his house arrest and travelled to Norwich, to my recording studio, which kind of meant that we were complicit to the fact. Should we have informed the authorities? The people that organised it have covered their tracks so that there is no mention of the location and have stated that they had no idea and only had a phone number. We thought it best to follow suit and keep stum. They obviously had a better grasp of the gravity of the situation than myself. The 500th episode of The Simpsons aired in February 2012, by which time I had quietly leaked the story to a very few close friends. They also thought it was a good idea to keep the entire situation under my hat. To this day, only a handful of people know this story. So there it is. I don't know if this is of any use to you, but this is my story as it happened. It was a strange, secretive meeting, and it left me feeling uneasy. Julian Assange left me feeling uneasy. He was, as my old art college tutor would describe, as a strange cove. It was as though he was all-important and kind of looked through us. An almost non-human aura about him, which sounds ridiculous, but he left me feeling very strange and uneasy. So,
Well, that again all adds up to him being managed, and if he was indeed in this cult, as we, have sort of alluded to, that aura may have come or may have been generated by the activities that the cult, indulged in.
Mm-hmm. And we've spoken about these rape allegations from Sweden. Let's just come on to that, because I think that is why he's under some sort of house arrest. And there's an ongoing allegation, he claims not made by the person who was allegedly raped, by the police. And they've sent a request to question him, which has never happened, right? So he's not allowed to leave the UK apparently, right? So this is the current situation as I understand it. You've got two supposed entities want him, which is the Swedish police for some rape allegation and the US government. But when you hear the allegations that the US have made against him, they say that it's a US secret grand jury investigation and impending prosecution. They never say prosecution. It's an impending prosecution. So they're still investigating him, right? So this has been going on for years and years. They've never said, right, he's guilty, we're going to issue the extradition request. As far as I'm aware, there's no extradition request from the US. It's just this ongoing impending prosecution and grand jury investigation. But the way that the legal situation is that the Ecuadorian embassy have given him asylum because of the US situation. So they're saying, well, we don't agree that he should be taken to the US and put on trial because he's actually doing a good thing by leaking these documents. So we are going to give him asylum in Ecuador. So really he should go to Ecuador. The reason why he's not gone to Ecuador is because the British government are saying, right, you can't leave the UK until you have been interviewed by the Swedish government or by the Swedish police, because you might escape that prosecution by leaving our country. So the Ecuador government say, well, okay, well, he'll live in the Ecuadorian embassy. So you've got this ridiculous situation which has gone on for 4 years, where he comes out onto his balcony and where is he? He's in the media capital of the world, London, where people have got access to him and he's got a platform there. Right?
Absolutely, literally, yeah.
And
but also he says in the interview with Pilger that the Swedish government or the Swedish police have cleared him. They've said that they don't believe the allegations of rape anyway. Mm-hmm. So if he gets extradited to Sweden, he'll be immediately extradited from there to the US. That's what he says in the Pilger interview. Yeah. So again, it's all
well, he does say that that's the reason why he doesn't go to Sweden in order to be interviewed, is because he thinks the Swedish government would extradite him.
Right.
So why doesn't he think the UK government would extradite him?
That's it.
You've also got other possible links to Sweden with, he said that he's placed his servers in Sweden in the past because of he says that they have good laws on freedom of speech. So we've got these 4 players. We've got the UK, Sweden, the US and Ecuador. So the point I'm making is that I've said this in my lecture, that Ecuador have got very good relations with the United States. They're not some rogue state that would want to undermine the US by helping WikiLeaks leak their documents. They're an ally of the US. So I don't believe that they're doing this against the wishes of the US government. I believe they're doing it so that he's then got some legitimate place, a platform from which to speak to the London media.
And to present this illusion that he's under threat,
Yeah.
you know, but he's not really.
No.
And you ask for other questions. I think he's been there for, what, 5 years or 7
Yeah.
years or something, isn't
I
it?
think it's approaching 5 years, I believe.
So who's paying who's paying for him to be there? Who's supporting him? Who's paying for his board and lodgings? And
that's the other thing we haven't come on to.
right.
The funding issue.
And I think Pilger asks him in this interview. He asks him, where do you publish the documents from? Because there's this question: is he sat at a laptop in the Ecuadorian embassy, managing the website and receiving all these documents? Blah blah blah, and it's claimed in the Pilger interview that the Ecuadorian government have cut the internet link to the embassy, so that he can't use it, presumably. But then Assange has said something that doesn't really matter, because he says in this Pilger interview, we publish from France, Germany, Netherlands, and a number of other countries. So that right there says there must be a group of them, there must be a team of them. So my question then is, okay, so it's not just Assange publishing these documents, it's got people helping him. So why aren't they, why haven't they been grabbed by the US government? Why aren't they under investigation if it's really such a problem? And how have they been able to set up this international network? I'd like to know more about that.
Yeah, and the other interview that people might want to watch is by Democracy Now! Amy Goodman,
yes,
who went into the embassy. Now, I remember that programme. It used to be on Edge Media Television. And I watched it now and again, thinking that it was an alternative news programme, but it's absolutely not, because she doesn't ask him any of the right questions. So both the Pilger interview and the Democracy Now! Interview, I'll just read out what I've written here. What they're doing is, they're promoting what I call a classic phony bone of contention.
Yes.
Because their arguments that they're having, or the point that their discussion contains, a probably flawed assumption. And that flawed assumption, which is the information which is being leaked, is it being leaked for leaking's sake, or is it not a psyop, or an attempt to control the alternative media? So the contention assumes that WikiLeaks is what it purports to be, right? So they have this argument over, is it ethically right what you are doing, or should you be stopped from leaking documents? That's the argument that they have in these. Well, is John Pilger mainstream? I don't know what he is, right? But why hasn't he asked Assange about his childhood? Why hasn't he got to the bottom of the funding?
Yes.
Why isn't he asking all the questions that we are asking in this interview?
Exactly.
Right? Why is he just taking as read that WikiLeaks is what it purports to be, and then helping big up WikiLeaks' name in the world by having that argument? Oh, well, by leaking that, you're putting people's lives at risk, Julian. You are a threat, or are you really for getting the truth out?
That's it. And I mean, most of the Pilger interviews centres around what we were discussing earlier about how WikiLeaks is influencing the US election. That's essentially the theme which runs through the Pilger interview. And as I said earlier, he even backs up this idea that the Saudis are funding ISIS and ISIL terrorism through the Clinton Foundation. That's mentioned. And so it's pretty much mainstream stuff. It's not really going outside any of this territory really that they're normally in. It's just that Julian Assange is sort of being looked at as something which sits in between the political parties and is essentially compromising the operation of both those political parties. In the US particularly.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that he says in the Amy Goodman interview is that he hasn't had any light for years in the Ecuadorian embassy. He's in a room without any daylight. What is the Ecuadorian embassy not got windows? Huh? Well, he can't sit near a window.
Oh, exactly.
It's just bollocks.
Yeah,
it is bollocks.
Yeah. And the other thing which he mentions in the Amy Goodman interview, I think there may be more than one Amy Goodman interview actually. It's the one that I watched. She's not at the embassy. He's been interviewed over Skype, so she's not actually there. But he mentions in that interview, again, another of the little things that tweaked me, was he talks about Naomi Klein and how Naomi Klein is talking about climate change, but the climate change is an important issue. Again, he doesn't say that climate change is another scam. And he could just say that if that's, he should know that. He should know, if he's an intelligent person, he's looked at the evidence, he should know that the climate change issue is another scam which is being used to control people, but he doesn't say that. So again, he's promoting mainstream views.
Another thing that he states in the Amy Goodman interview is that that the UK police are surveilling him, obviously because they don't want him to leave the country because of the Swedish thing, supposedly. And that is costing the UK police £15,000 per day to surveil the Ecuadorian embassy.
Yeah.
So how would he know that?
Yeah.
Why would they tell anyone
Right,
that?
that's right, yeah.
Now, another person who has championed WikiLeaks is Annie Michon, who's the former MI5, the former handler of David Shayler. Sorry, the former girlfriend of, did I say handler? Sorry,
I think you did, yes.
The former girlfriend of David Shayler. Yeah, she who used to work for MI5. Used to. Doesn't work for them now, apparently.
No, I don't think she does.
No, not anymore. Not
anymore, I don't
But she
think.
champions WikiLeaks.
Apparently she does, yes.
Yeah, and I think she was there at the statue of Assange in Germany. Oh, Julian, we've got a statue of you now.
Wow. Well, that's pretty good. Maybe she was hoping they'd make one of her. Who knows?
Hope not. Okay, so shall we come on to the funding?
Why not?
Okay, which is another red flag. Assange has claimed that Visa, MasterCard and PayPal have all blocked payments to his organisation. Right? So how does he still get funding? Now, this guy we mentioned earlier, John Young, has made comments about the funding, and there's a quote on page, there's a few quotes in Daniel Estion's book. Let's just read a few quotes.
And as again, people can go to the Cryptome website and get more of these because there's a fair breakdown there.
The linchpin of WikiLeaks' financial network is Germany's Wow Holland Foundation. Mr. Assange said WikiLeaks gets about half its money from modest donations processed by its website, and the other half from personal contacts, including people with some millions who approach us. But that's not their only source of funding, according to email exchanges. Acquiring covert funding from intelligence agencies was also contemplated. Right, so they contemplated getting funding from intelligence agencies. Let me just read this other one on page 51. Apparently, John Young claims, this comes allegedly from a WikiLeaks insider, we don't know who, that up until April 2010, the total donations were $243,896. So that's just over 3 years. That's about £73,000 a year. But Assange claims it takes $200,000 just to keep the lights on and $600,000 to be fully funded. Right.
Yeah.
So it's not possible, if these figures are correct, for them to have survived through the donations they've had from this WikiLeaks insider. So they're getting money from somewhere else then.
Yeah.
And I'm not aware of any accounts ever being published. This is an organisation which goes on about being open and transparent and releasing everyone's private information, but doesn't produce any financial accounts or audits on its own organisation.
Right. Yeah, that's the situation.
Mm-hmm. Now, I've mentioned George Soros a number of times, and he's connected to a number of these organisations. Do you know much about Soros, Andrew?
I don't know an awful lot. I know that he has been connected to, he's even been connected to people like Stephen Greer and the Disclosure Project in terms of funding. So, he's one of these figures that pops up a bit like Kissinger, that he seems to have his finger in many pies, but mainly from a financial rather than a political angle, is my understanding.
Mm-hmm. Let me read this quote, page 93. Soros' fingerprints are all over the WikiLeaks project. For example, not only has Freedom House worked closely with Soros Open Society Institutes, In promoting such projects as the Washington-financed 2005 Tulip Revolution in Kyrgyzstan that brought the Washington-friendly dictator and drug boss Kurmanbek Bakayev to power, but WikiLeaks board member Ben Lorry, a former security boss of Google, is a director of open rights group funded by Soros front group, the Open Society Foundation. In a nutshell, WikiLeaks is packed with people who either work for Soros or are Soros collaborators. We know that Open Society Foundation was considered as one of the premier organisations to look for funds. So Soros funds sort of left-wing psyops, basically, that have a geopolitical intention. I advise people do their own research on George Soros and what his real motives may well be, but he's connected to Rothschilds and obviously the City of London and the whole
banking network, banking families. Yeah.
Let's just cover now the actual mechanism of disclosure.
Yes.
Because WikiLeaks will accept documents just sent through the post. They've had various PO boxes. So if you've got a paper document, you make sure your fingerprints aren't on it, you send it to a PO box, right? But PO boxes can be infiltrated, and WikiLeaks, if they had a PO box, there would be nothing to stop intelligence agencies actually opening their mail, right? So that's not 100% secure. Now they have developed, they claim, a means by which people can go on their website and upload documents to them without the user then being identified with the certain protocols that they've developed. Now that may well be true. And another point to make is that you don't actually need a portal like this, a secure portal to leak documents. You don't need a PO box. All you need to do is you buy, let's say, a brand new laptop with cash, or you obtain a computer that's not linked to you. You go onto a wireless network, and then you open an email account under a different name to your own, and then you send the documents to a journalist or to me or to anyone in a like internet cafe.
That's right.
And then you chuck the laptop in the bin.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't even need a laptop. You can do it with a phone now. You can get like a 20 quid phone that's got wireless internet on it, and then just chuck the phone in the bin.
Yeah. So you can send terabytes of information that way.
Yes. Yeah.
Not that most leaks would consist of terabytes. Documents are very small in their nature in terms of you're talking a few K. So you don't actually need this facility to leak something and still remain anonymous.
That's it. And we could also make a case about the blog that we discussed on the Mars rover program. That was essentially a leak, if that story was true, which appeared to be, and it was just on a blog. The guy just anonymized it, leaked.
We don't know who he is.
No?
Yeah. You were just going to mention that really important VIP went to see Julian Assange. Who was that?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about the situation in the Ecuadorian embassy, which seemed to be pretty artificial. And I learned when I was, doing a bit of research for this program that Lady Gaga spent 5 hours with him. This was fairly recently, I think in the last couple of years. And so you'll find that story. And you also mentioned that...
Yeah, Pamela Anderson, I heard, was the other one.
Yeah, so...
I wonder what he did with her.
Well, indeed, yeah.
All right. So if let's just look at, because the leaks have come from very diverse areas. So you've got defense, banking, personal emails, foreign intelligence, congressional reports, Bilderberg meetings, Guantanamo Bay procedures, blah, 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 blah. So if it's been done via hacking, then it's someone's got very good knowledge of all these different systems. But we're led to believe it's whistleblowers. I find it hard to believe that someone like Bradley Manning would have access to so much information. I mean, maybe they do, I don't know.
We can imagine that, the biggest intelligence gathering agencies are the CIA and the NSA. So we can imagine that WikiLeaks could be a portal for them to make stuff public in a way which they saw fit, to influence public perception of the election campaign, or a certain, if they wanted to get a bank shut down for whatever reason, then if NSA had gathered information on that bank or their shareholders, they could front that through WikiLeaks and get that bank shut down.
Yeah. And they may have shut the country down of Iceland in that way.
Yeah, indeed.
Because there was the Icelandic banking collapse, and what happened there was WikiLeaks released a document after the collapse which kind of revealed how it happened, who was corrupt, who was funneling money here and there, and that then caused an outrage. But they then said, okay, well, WikiLeaks is now going to help us reform our information laws and our banking system. So WikiLeaks was actually involved in the governmental process in Iceland, allegedly, to help them reform their laws, which, does that sound right to you?
Absolutely.
Why, has he got a degree in law or finance? Not that I'm aware of. So it's just so unbelievable.
And on that sort of thing as well, I had a thought when he was in the Pilger interview again. He says, Assange actually says, WikiLeaks has been publishing for 10 years, 10 million documents, several thousand publications, several thousand different sources, and we've never got it wrong, he says. We've never got it wrong. So he's putting forward that they're just 100% reliable, but they're only as reliable as how truthful the documents that they release are. So if somebody leaks a fake document or a document which has lies in it, they're leaking lies just like everyone else is. So for him to make a statement like that, it's ridiculous. Say, oh, we're never wrong. Well, you may have successfully leaked the documents, but are those documents accurate?
Here's a thing here that they've released in March 2008. WikiLeaks published what they referred to as the collected secret Bibles of Scientology. I mean, any comment on that?
Well, again, Scientology has come under fire, so if they want to manipulate people in Scientology or the public perception of it, again, WikiLeaks is a way of doing that.
And here's another comment, I've just highlighted this here. Sarah Palin's Yahoo email account contents in September 2008, some of Sarah Palin's emails. But apparently it was hacked into by members of Anonymous. And then at some point it was revealed publicly that the person who had hacked was David Kernel, a 22-year-old economics student at the University of Tennessee. So WikiLeaks seemed to have worked in conjunction with certain people from this anonymous movement, and there's a huge question mark over that movement as well, is there not?
Yeah, very much, yeah.
And whether it's another front stroke psyop in order to handle the alternative dissent and alternative media and what have you.
Yes.
ClimateGate emails. Now, this is an interesting comment, because the ClimateGate emails, these were emails from the University of East Anglia, which showed that the scientists were fraudulently trying to big up the claims of climate increases.
Global warming, yeah.
But WikiLeaks didn't leak those ClimateGate emails. It says, WikiLeaks, although the information was not originally leaked by them, they've hosted some of those emails. So they've already been leaked out by someone else. So they'll put them on their server, right? So they're not, so they kind of claiming credit for blowing the whistle on this ClimateGate thing, but not really. Bilderberg meeting reports from 1955, 56, 57, 58, 60, 62, 63 and 1980. So nothing really recent.
So they're probably trying to use that to enhance their credibility or enhance their role. And again, going back to the hackers that might be working for them, if these hackers really are ethical and they really are doing damage, and they go to WikiLeaks, then again they can be identified and dealt with accordingly. You know, either put in prison or made, an offer which will get them to work for the very forces that they're trying to work against.
Here's another one which will interest you, Andrew. 9/11 pager messages. On the 25th of November 2009, WikiLeaks released 570,000 intercepts of pager messages sent on the day of the September the 11th attacks, right? So this is people obviously in panic. They've seen this thing happen. Now, all those text messages are going to do is reassert the official story, are they not? Because
Generally
really
speaking,
nobody on that day was questioning the official version.
Yeah. I mean, there is, we're going off on a side issue here, but there is a slightly interesting thing that came out of those text messages, which was the reports of Hurricane Erin, which were automatic from a weather service text. Those are quite interesting. But outside of that, yes, they're pretty much just not that much of a useful set of information for events on 9/11.
So it says here that when WikiLeaks released the Baghdad airstrike video in 5th of April 2010, in the week following the release, WikiLeaks was the search term with the most significant growth worldwide in the last 7 days as measured by Google Insights. So we've also got, briefly touch on the Afghan war logs. I think this was the first time that I woke up and attached any kind of importance to WikiLeaks, because I saw Assange giving his lecture when he was talking about these war logs, and I just thought, wow, this is 92,000 documents, and each one of the documents is a report on collateral damage from the ground. So it says, on this date and this time, we bombed this village. There was 7 villagers killed. We blew up 4 buildings. It took this long. This is how much ammunition was used. Right, and then, okay, next one. And it's just like that. Thousands of documents. Thousands of the Afghan war. And then they released the Iraq ones as well. And it was then I thought, this is really big what they're releasing, which there's nothing parallels it in history in terms of the detail of a conflict. Not that many people have actually looked at them.
No,
but again, is this more like the emperor sticking the criminals' heads on the top of a pole and saying, look what we can do? Yeah. According to a report on the Daily Beast website, the Obama administration has asked Britain, Germany and Australia, among others, to consider bringing criminal charges against Assange for the Afghan war leaks and to help limit Assange's travel across international borders. In the United States, a joint investigation by the Army and the Federal Bureau of Investigation may try to prosecute. May try to prosecute. It's always this this ongoing investigation and impending prosecution.
Yeah.
He's been going 10 years, over 10 years. So perhaps we can just finish by assuming that we're correct. What's really the intention behind it, the real intention, and where they're trying to take it? Have you got any thoughts on that?
Well, again, going back to what I was saying earlier, that it is like a new way of getting things into the public domain, where there is a level of, there's like a sort of a wall between the public and the information in terms of where does it come from, who's leaked it.
Mm-hmm. There's cherry picking of the information.
I think so, yeah. And it's just that it's like, it's a bit hard to describe, but WikiLeaks is meant to be this kind of rebellious portal where people are doing things that they shouldn't be doing. So this whole idea of documents being leaked, is quote unquote naughty, whereas stuff being in the newspaper isn't quite the same. In other words, it's like the way that this information is being accessed is, you ask questions about whether it's ethical or not, and that isn't quite the same with the mainstream. The way that information comes through WikiLeaks is it's tainted. It's tainted in some way. I find it difficult to describe, but that's what again, going back to a Guardian article, that it's becoming the way that journalism will work.
Because obviously they have to make it look like what it's claimed to be. They can't be they have to release information which is real and true, it's real people's emails, and people have to believe that they're this renegade organization which is going against the establishment. So they have to be careful not to be too, let's say, in one direction in what they're doing if they wanted to create this one world government, because they've released so